Kwe, Tanze, good morning, bonjour. My name's Pam Demoff. I'm the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to this event to sign a protocol agreement with the Assembly of First Nations on the Child and Family Services Reform. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Ottawa, the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin people. We're honored to welcome Elder Mike Mitchell, who will officially open our meeting by blessing us with a prayer.
Ehni wedegan do agadalolk. Kahnumwe. And the Wahialan, that's the one Horado, Nesequayadis. Nedasanguayo, Nahadane, and Guadani at Stark. The Chinodo, Yetinista, Jihunjad. Tony no Aguego, Ne, Dagutscow Haki, Northern Ne, in Guadaniru. To know any Garnigarunio. Any Yuhunjad. Any Niga Rahire. Kayo dona down hike. Tono do what's carto. Kayo dona down hikes. Uji do go la diggers. Tony no and the watage. Kaili niga welake. Azet jaguego. Neda hodio daki. Head the watage. Tano ne, enigin the guy, the what's carto, ne digging the garaquare. Aska ne, yeti sut at sutaneka garaque. Tanaska nenoa when is allowed to swat. Negadina ne, aguego, agagueni, and the wait no neguaniguna, the wadenor, aguego in you, waiting not. Dano neoni, who just an equation to what's cartus, a sotaneca no go. Nay, tis a togon, de nyandeste, Chenija to 100 down hike, when on at the ogre, a sotaneca no go. One any oni, he should not go to Yati, ne, tono, sagorihumde. Ne gaili yung guedak, ne dinkianya dunge, Jenny, you think what the hugget you hum jat. Tananeoni, Sayata, Hezorio dan. Ne, I do ayena, ne unguana, dano ne, Jeniji, didn't want to do the Horatus. Ne, Scania de Rio, Nahosanoda. Ne, Sahari hooked, Haguego, Nayandas are your water, said you, give way home. Negadias away, ne, turn you to hike it. Ona, ne, good school. You got wish to hike it. I was the Wayena and go one. When I not got in here, net to the Nactalaguani, ne, Sequayadis. Negadina, ne, to a yara. Legina Hoda, ne, Yaguaya. Jenigarivis, he went acted there, Humjaga didn't go down hike. Good school, ne, that's the one who had a dunsek. Legina Hoda, no, ne, Yaguaya, Humjaga. Ne, I'm going to watch it. Did why that's. I go going to teach a togon. The Hadigun Sadugini, he told the Yums. I go going to do our order. The Chino, I go, ne, scone don Dunyo. There you see your dance, and go soon. Down on the they're gone. Gonna show one argue, do a diet. Then the Hodio Daki, Unayam, scone agahage, you got that song down there. Rodigio. Negadina ne, no one is allowed. Not your dory when they gone, said, Nesquaya this. I ain't going under again, Nescadi Gunlio. Down on there, you want to know, I am still, no. As you got you one and not them down, what did you want done? As you got in there, what got no dungo, no one is allowed. Down on the door dance, not them down, do what did you want to get it. So now you're just one you going down at all.
Mitchell. National Chief Bellegarde was saying earlier how important ceremony is, and we did have a gift of tobacco prior to coming into the room. It's now my honor to welcome National Chief Perry Bellegarde of the Assembly of First Nations to today's event.
Hei, ne naskomon nista kan naskomtin wa kakio. Kiteyak Mike naskomtin. No tauinan smantu kan naskomtin. Jenish na bek algonquins kan naskomtin wa. Nista tapemiasik. My friends and relatives, just to acknowledge the Creator for another beautiful day and thanking Mike for the prayer and acknowledging that we're on unceded Algonquin territory, thanking them. The Minister, Marc, for being here, and as well the Deputy Parliamentary Secretary, Pam. It's a good day because we're talking about the implementation of Bill C-92. And I've always said it's one thing to get things passed into law, but it's really more important about the implementation of that law. And we've always talked about a distinctions-based approach for implementation of Bill C-92. And that's really what this MOU is about. And it's about improving the quality of life for our children. We know there's 40,000 children in foster care right across Canada. And when Bill C-92 was passed, it was about making a difference and making sure that those children were looked after, that they were able to be kept home in their families and communities surrounded by their relatives. And that's really what this is about, making a difference for the children that are in care. And in C-92, I've always said it before, that one of the most important things in C-92 is that First Nations law is paramount. And I've always said this to our chiefs and councils and membership across Canada, that you need to occupy the field, create your own laws and exert your own jurisdiction. And this is what C-92 is about. And that's the opportunity. It's the first time other governments have recognized, because our leadership and our laws and sovereignty are always forgotten, put to the side. But in this piece of legislation, it was recognized. So now it's time for implementation. And that's really what this MOU is about, is implementation of Bill C-92. And of course, along with that is the necessary resources that will have to be forthcoming, and it's needs-based. And that's an important thing to remember. It's needs-based, and to get those resources out to make that difference. And that's my comments this morning, really, what it's about. And I want to call on, as National Chief, we've got 10 regional chiefs across Canada, and we get to hand out portfolios. And one of the portfolios, of course, is child welfare. It is a very important issue, and one of our regional chiefs as a team, Regional Chief Kevin Hart from Manitoba, has worked hard along with a team of chiefs and delegates and officials to make this happen. So I also want to have him say a few words regarding C-92 and this MOU we're signing. Chief Kevin Hart, I believe, is on the line.
Morning, National Chief.
Oh, there he is. Danse.
Dante, National Chief.
Mananto, kima, go ahead. Pipik straight up, Sisi. Go ahead.
Oh, I want to welcome everybody and thank Elder Mike Mitchell for the opening prayer, as well as to acknowledge the Algonquin territory. I want to bring greetings to everybody from the Treaty 1 territory here in Manitoba. And as the national portfolio holder for child welfare from the social development sector, today we're celebrating the signature of a historical agreement that will undoubtedly advance the rights of our children and our families. I want to acknowledge our Chiefs Committee on Child Welfare because this protocol between the Assembly of First Nations and Canada is a pathway that supports First Nations in exercising their jurisdiction over the well-being of their children and families. And it's very important for us as First Nations that this is the first time that Canada recognizes our sovereignty and jurisdiction when it comes to creating our own laws, especially when it comes to the well-being, again, of our children and our families. I can assure you that this agreement does not represent a one-size-fits-all approach. The protocol will support First Nations as they transition towards exercising jurisdiction over child and family services in a process and at a pace that they determine. And that's very important when First Nations are starting to go back to creating their own laws according to the ways and the protocols and the tradition of our people. There has to be an understanding that our needs as First Nations are very unique. The protocol is a positive step, not only to ensure that the needs of our families are being heard at the national level, but also to strengthen the working relationship between Canada and First Nations. And that's more evident, even more so right now across the nation as you see what's transpiring, and that for us to sign this protocol agreement today is very historic. Engaging in legislation, as you know, is a complex endeavor because of the differences between First Nations on Turtle Island from coast to coast to coast. a First Nations determined distinctions-based plan that is flexible to account for all the many different legal, political, and cultural variances is a phenomenal achievement. Now we must put it into action. I look forward to the work ahead, working with leadership and everybody, especially to protect our children and families. You know, it's our duty as First Nation leaders to create a better future for our children and families. And I figure this is the utmost importance, even more so right now with what we're seeing transpiring nationally. All Canadians as treaty people share a responsibility in creating and keeping respectful relationships for the benefit of our children. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you, National Chief Bellegarde and Regional Chief Hart, for your words and most especially for your leadership on this issue. I'd now like to ask you to join me in welcoming the Honourable Marc Miller, Minister of Indigenous Services of Canada.
Thank you, Pam. Kwe Tanse, good morning. My speech said good afternoon, so maybe they wanted me to say it this afternoon, but we're early. Good morning. Bonjour. What konora do ize, Mike? Nyongo eneti gawanios. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Canada's Parliament is located on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin people. Today, thanks to the help of technology and some adequate physical distancing, we can gather for this historic occasion. I want to thank National Chief Bellegarde, Regional Chief Hart, who you just heard, and all those who have contributed to the productive partnership that has made this day possible. The Child and Family Services Protocol between the Assembly of First Nations and Canada is an expression of mutual cooperation. It's the realization of a new structure that will allow us to continue and strengthen our collaborative work on the implementation of an act respecting First Nations, Inuit, Métis children, youth, and families. I'm proud to be able to participate in such an event today on a topic of the utmost importance, keeping First Nations children and families together, connected to their families, cultures, and communities. The coming into force of the Act on January 1st of this year marked a historic turning point for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children and families. It finally put into place what Indigenous peoples across this country have been asking for governments for decades, that their inherent jurisdiction over child and family services over their children be affirmed. This legislation provides flexible pathways for Indigenous peoples to move forward with their own models and laws so that they can decide what is best for their children, their families, and their communities. It respects the role of communities, cultures, and languages and the role it plays for nurturing children. The Act also puts forward national guiding principles, creating minimum standards for all those who provide child and family services to First Nations, Inuit, and Métis families, including provinces, territories, and service providers. Ce protocole relatif aux services à l'enfance et à la famille entre l'Assemblée des Premières Nations et le Canada est une expression de coopération mutuelle. C'est la réalisation d'une nouvelle structure qui nous permettra de poursuivre et de renforcer notre travail de collaboration pour la mise en œuvre de la loi sur les enfants, les jeunes et les familles des Premières Nations, des Inuits et des Métis. Je suis fier de pouvoir participer à un tel événement aujourd'hui sur un sujet de la plus haute importance, maintenir les enfants et les familles des Premières Nations ensemble, en contact avec leurs familles, leur culture et leur communauté. L'entrée en vigueur de la loi le 1er janvier de cette année a marqué un tournant historique pour les enfants et les familles des Premières Nations, Inuits et Métis. Elle a enfin mis en place ce que les peuples autochtones de tout le pays demandent au gouvernement depuis des décennies, que leurs compétences inhérentes sur les services à l'enfance et à la famille soient affirmées. Cette législation offre aux peuples autochtones la flexibilité nécessaire pour aller de l'avant avec leur propre modèle et loi afin qu'ils puissent décider de ce qui est le mieux pour leurs enfants, leurs familles et leur communauté. Elle respecte le rôle que les communautés, les cultures et les langues jouent dans l'éducation des enfants, de leurs enfants. La loi met également en avant des principes directeurs nationaux, créant des normes minimales pour tous ceux qui fournissent des services aux enfants et aux familles des Premières Nations, des Inuits et des Métis, y compris les provinces, les territoires et les fournisseurs de services. As we move forward in partnership with the AFN, this protocol represents a commitment to regular bilateral meetings and a mutually agreed schedule and agenda. It also supports the development of distinctions-based policies at the national level through the establishment of the Joint National Working Group on Legislative Implementation in relation to First Nations. The protocol allows for the development and creation of tools and mechanisms at the federal level to support implementation of the Act, and the establishment of a joint fiscal table on First Nations Child and Family Services reform to explore and identify fiscal issues relevant to First Nations implementation of the legislation. The protocol will help guide discussions surrounding the implementation of the Act and ensure that this continues in the spirit of co-development. It recognizes that individual First Nations governments have the autonomy to enter into arrangements or agreements and take the other implementation steps according to their own priorities. It provides a frame from which further concrete action can be taken in the spirit of full collaboration and partnership. Ce protocole contribuera à diriger les discussions entourant la mise en œuvre de la loi et à garantir que celles-ci se poursuivent dans l'esprit du co-développement. Il reconnaît que chaque gouvernement des Premières Nations a l'autonomie nécessaire pour conclure des arrangements ou des accords ou pour prendre d'autres mesures de mise en œuvre selon ses propres priorités. Elle fournit un cadre à partir duquel d'autres mesures concrètes peuvent être prises dans un esprit de collaboration et de partenariat total. This act is a promise that we will do better for Indigenous children of this country. It's a vow to Indigenous families and communities that we are determined to make things right. It is a pledge to Indigenous governments and organizations that we are dedicated to positive change. Our collective hope is that this act will secure a better and brighter future for every subsequent generation of First Nation Inuit and Métis children in this country. The signing today signifies another good step in realizing that shared goal. Notre espoir collectif est que cette loi assurera un avenir meilleur et plein de promesses à chaque génération d'enfants des Premières Nations Inuit et des Métis de ce pays. La cérémonie de signature d'aujourd'hui constitue une nouvelle étape importante dans la réalisation de cet objectif commun. Today we join together in the spirit of progress, of autonomy, of putting things right. This day is long overdue, and I'm honored to be a part of it. Miigwech, Marcy, thank you, merci.
Thank you, Minister Miller, for your heartfelt words. I'd like to now invite National Chief Bellegarde and Minister Miller to sign the Protocol Agreement on Child and Family Services Reform.
You can sign that one.
Give a pen.
Yeah. Can you use mine? You gotta sterilize it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Do you want me to hand this to hand sanitizer? real quick?
We'll do the hand sanitizer.
Yeah, we'll do the hand sanitizer later. Okay. Okay.
So thank you both. All joking aside, this is an historic moment, and I'm really honored to have been a small part of it. I'm going to turn it over now to Elder Mike Mitchell to offer us a closing prayer.
Tanyerinya heda wahawe no ni salade. Na dego no hodi yuri wa. Ne gadi no wa ni salade. Ne do tara. Ne jido ya na jono do wasa. Ne saga. Te jido den harato. Na di do da sa ye tini sa ha je hon jad. Tana gwego jena hoda ne to kawa hake. Na di guarda no dat sta. Nega di agwego, scaligone yonyate, de cecino harato. Signore, ne, cicane galogna, ciguiloto. Gaeli ni gawalake, uci do hogoni la degi, stinkini guna moia. Tano neoni, degin de garacquare. Asca, nasu taneca na guani tina dan qua ti sutta. Tano nece do wahtia, ne duon, onisalade, do swatet. Tano neoni, Tijin garu hiadi, ne swadi so to the Naktaragwani. Negadia so wet, get to Yari hit the Wahawe, no one is allowed. Tijin Horado, Hagwe, Guchini Hadu, on Dow, the Dono, yet you want a gun, said Gadi in Guedag. Gadio Hage, no, Naya, Scana Yams a door, Genoa, this was that squadron. So wet, got the honor, not Gagweni. Now the Guadi, no one is allowed. Near that scar noto, tonight on again, there's one you gonna. Today, we have marked an important occasion, event, and before anything else, we're taught by our elders to always remember to open and close with an acknowledgement, starting from Mother Earth and everything else that gives us life. From all the land and the waters, the medicines, tree life, animal life, the four winds, the two suns, Grandmother Moon and Elder Brother Sun, the stars, and they say beyond the heavens, to the Creator Himself, we give thanks. We give thanks that we're able to walk this land in good health. We give thanks for our families. We give thanks for our communities and nations that we belong to. We give thanks for all mankind as we walk the good road, try to understand our place on earth and beyond into the heavens, what we call our place. To secure our place, we always give ceremonial thanks, ceremonial acknowledgement to each other of respect and kindness. And those are the words that officially closes today's meeting. Each and every one of you have a safe journey back to your lodges. Tony Gawana, Ganeto.
Thank you, Elder Mike, for the beautiful prayer and ensuring that we both began and ended this event in a good way. I want to pass it over to the minister's staff, who will moderate the media availability portion of the event. But thank you again to Elder Mike Mitchell, National Chief Bellegarde, Minister Miller, and all our guests who joined us for this event today. Miigwech, merci, thank you, merci.
Merci, thank you. We will now take questions from the phone. It will be one question and one follow-up. And then after, we'll go for questions in the room. And nous allons prendre les questions premièrement au téléphone. Donc, une question et une question de suivi. Nous allons ensuite nous diriger vers les questions dans la salle. Donc, encore une fois, une question de suivi. Donc, opérateur, nous sommes prêts.
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. There will be a brief pause while the participants register for questions. Il y aura un court délai vous permettant de vous enregistrer dans la file d'attente pour la période de questions. Thank you for your patience. Merci de patienter. La première question, the first question is from Marie Vastel, Le Devoir. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Miller. Ma question est pour vous. Je voulais savoir si vous pouviez nous faire une mise à jour sur la mise en œuvre de cette entente-là et de la loi au Québec. Le gouvernement québécois a contesté votre loi en décembre 2019. Je me demandais si vous pouviez simplement nous expliquer ou nous exposer si le dossier a avancé pendant la pandémie et à quel point êtes-vous confiant que la loi et ce protocole d'entente-là vont s'appliquer au Québec?
Merci Marie pour la question. Écoutez, nous sommes très confiants des assises constitutionnelles sur lesquelles repose la loi. Elle est en vigueur, comme vous l'avez souligné, depuis le 1er janvier. Je ne pense pas qu'il y ait qui que ce soit au pays qui pourrait nier ce standard vraiment minimal des meilleurs intérêts de l'enfant qui est appliqué de façon nationale. Je comprends que le Québec a des objections de nature procédurale, mais nous sommes très confiants de nos assises constitutionnelles. Le travail qui reste à faire en est un qui implique toutes les provinces, tous les territoires. Comme je l'ai souligné dans mon discours, ça prend une réorientation de la façon dont on interpelle les jeunes, une emphase accrue, non sur l'intervention, mais sur l'accompagnement et l'affirmation de l'autodétermination de quelque chose que nous, comme non-autochtones, prenons pour acquis, notamment le contrôle, l'éducation et l'épanouissement de nos propres enfants. Je ne pense pas qu'il y ait qui que ce soit au pays qui nierait ce fait. Là, le projet de loi, évidemment, avance. C'est un projet à long terme. Les gens qui détiennent les droits inhérents qui sont affirmés par le protocole d'entente d'aujourd'hui et d'autant plus la loi, c'est les communautés et les familles. Donc, c'est quelque chose qui se fait de communauté en communauté, de concert avec l'Assemblée des Premières Nations, dans le cas des Premières Nations. Mais il reste que c'est un engagement qui doit se faire avec les communautés, avec les ressources financières physiques et autres à l'appui. Okay, so we're quite confident about the constitutional basis on which the law resides and is rested. This is about the inherent right of Indigenous peoples to have something that we take as non-Indigenous people for granted, which is the control over the education of your own children. This is a right that has been denied to First Nations, Inuit, and Métis throughout a very painful history. And this process was something that was asked to us by Indigenous communities, and this is the reason why it was co-developed with Indigenous communities and came to fruition and in force as of the 1st of January, establishing, among other things, a bare minimum for the rights and standards to be applied to children that are in care. This isn't something I don't think anyone in this country would deny, but it has been the case in the past. There are constitutional challenge. I don't dictate the terms on which provinces take the federal government to court on constitutional basis. This is their right, but we will defend it vigorously. And indeed, Indigenous communities who are affirming their inherent right will, I assume, do so as well. There is lots of work to do. The right holders, and I think the national chief, without taking words out of his mouth, would stress that the rights holders are communities, family members, who can avail themselves of this law, but we actually don't want to get there. We want to actually have resources in the community, decision-making being made in the community, not over intervention, which has been the model and apprehension, but actually accompaniment and allowing children to return home and never get to that position. And so that's a long-term and probably a very painful process that we have to undertake over the next few years. This protocol today establishes a roadmap that far too often in the past has been without consulting or without talking about financial resources in a structured way. And this provides a roadmap and a structured way to have those discussions. And I think the beneficiaries in the long term will be Indigenous children. And that's the objective that we should all remain focused on.
En suivi, Marie?
Oui, maybe for National Chief Bellegarde or Chief Hart, I don't know if he's still on the line. I'd like to know from you both whether you're concerned or worried as to whether this bill and this agreement today will actually be implemented and put into place in Quebec. I don't know if Chief Hart has a good understanding from the communities on the ground, but I'd like to hear from the both of you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. And from my perspective, I would encourage Premier Legault to instead of wasting resources on challenging the constitutionality of Bill C-92, is to start working with the leadership in Quebec to talk about jurisdiction and how this can be implemented fully, because it's clear that First Nations laws are paramount in the legislation, and it's not only the government of the federal government and provincial governments in Canada. You also have First Nations government, and their laws, like I've said, they need to be respected, honored, and implemented. And I would, instead of wasting all the tax dollars fighting this bill, to start working with chiefs and leadership to implement this bill. It's really in the best interest of the children. There's too many children in foster care under provincial systems. And we've said it this way, that you've got to focus on the children, keep them at home in their communities and their families. And again, that's what I would encourage, because it's one thing to have a bill. It's the next thing is for the implementation of it. And really that's what this is about, is the implementation of Bill C-92, distinctions-based approach. Everything across Canada right now is delegated authority under the existing Indian Child and Family Services organizations that are there. It's delegated authority from provincial pieces of legislation, which is not really right. And now here's an opportunity for First Nations to exercise their inherent right to self-government, self-determination, create their laws, their own First Nations Child and Family Services Act to improve the quality of life for children. That's what I would encourage in the belle province de Québec.
Merci. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Maria Robson, the Canadian Press, la presse canadienne. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
My first question is either for Chief Hart or Chief Bellegarde. There's been other times where provincial governments in particular have attempted to do this. I think, Chief Bellegarde, you just mentioned it about delegated authority, which Manitoba did many years ago and just did not seem to work. We have not seen a reduction in the number of kids who are taken into care. Why is this going to be different from that?
It's different because the inherent right is going to be exercised, and who knows better than the communities themselves how to look after their children. And right now, the existing system, we all can admit very clearly it's not working. And so this is an alternative to that. And the existing system, again, is based on somebody else's law. And it's all about making a better quality of life for children that are in that provincial system. There's over 40,000 across Canada. And we know it's not acceptable. We know that's not right. And so this is clearly an alternative to that. But it's under First Nations law and jurisdictions where you can start focusing on prevention, making sure that the children are kept with their family in a loving, caring, nurturing home. That's what this is all about. So it should make a difference in time, no question.
I guess my second question is either for maybe Chief Bellegarde again or Minister Miller. Funding has always been the key issue in terms of actual prevention, which you've both mentioned a few times now. I heard you mention funding, Minister Miller, but what kind of sort of assurances can you give that there will be the funding that is needed to actually implement this? And how long and what kind of funding will it take to actually start to see a reduction in the number of kids that are in foster care in this country?
Do you want to go first and I'll go after?
Well, this is a question I think that is occupying some of the top experts in this country, their time. In particular, what does it take? And it is an issue fundamentally of resources, fundamentally one of how money is allocated to ensure that children are treated at frankly the same standard, better than non-Indigenous children. We have made budgetary requests. The Prime Minister has committed to amounts sufficient to allow communities to transition, to affirm the authority over the children that have been taken into care. Even before the law came into force, our department, Indigenous Services Canada, was allocating funds to enter into these agreements. For everyone's benefit, in order to perfect these rights, there are mechanisms by which we will enter into a process so as not to leave children behind, whereby community laws, nation laws will be submitted and discussed with respect to a number of issues, the laws themselves, but also the resources to be allocated. And with those will come the discussions on funding. We do have to do this as a budgetary process, as an allocation process, but it can't be a top-down process that comes only from Ottawa. This is why the engagement session, notably with AFN, but the rights holders themselves are so important. So we need to increase resources so that we can engage and have those discussions with the rights holders, communities that want to affirm their sovereign laws, and allocate resources accordingly so children aren't taken out of communities and have this resources within the community. So to say that the number is unknown, and this is part of the discussion that I mentioned earlier in a response, is that we have the habit sometimes of throwing numbers at each other. This is a very important protocol by which we will have a roadmap in order to have those discussions and to talk about specific resources, knowing that more will be required and other topics will need to be engaged, principally in and around infrastructure, in and around housing, but also reorienting resources that we have from the intervention model and apprehension model to more of an accompaniment model that gives resources into community to focus on prevention.
It's needs-based. That's the key thing. It's needs-based, and that's once the needs have been identified, then clearly the necessary resources to meet the needs have to flow, and then it's our job to push the crown that happens, because that's always the biggest thing out on the First Nations territories, out in the communities. It's good to have the laws set up, but you need resources to implement those laws, and that's what it's all about. And if it's needs-based, it's needs-based, and the needs have been identified. The necessary resources should be there to fully implement the First Nations law under their jurisdiction. En français? J'ai pas français
C'était une question à propos.
A long way to go.
C'était une question à propos du financement puis les ressources nécessaires pour assouvir aux besoins des Premières Nations. Évidemment, et en fait, bien avant l'entrée en vigueur de la loi, nous avions alloué des ressources pour entamer les discussions que ça prend pour que les nations puissent affirmer leurs droits inhérents sur les familles et les enfants. Ce sont des discussions évidemment difficiles, notamment en ce qui a trait à l'affirmation, la perfection de ces droits, mais aussi de l'allocation de ressources qu'il va falloir décupler au cours des années. Les discussions se font, oui, dans le cadre que nous annonçons aujourd'hui avec l'accord avec l'APN, mais aussi avec ceux qui détiennent les droits, c'est-à-dire les nations et les familles, pour pouvoir assumer, pour pouvoir transformer le modèle d'appréhension, d'intervention pour un modèle plus collaboratif de prévention. Donc, des discussions qui vont se dérouler dans certains cas. Il y a des communautés qui sont prêtes, il y a des communautés qui sont moins prêtes. Donc, dans certains cas, des discussions qui vont peut-être, oui, durer un certain temps. Mais ce sont des ressources pour avoir un chiffre global. Il faudrait faire le décompte de toutes les communautés, de tous les besoins. Ce n'est pas un chiffre que qui que ce soit pourrait vous ventiler de façon raisonnable ici aujourd'hui et même dans quelques mois. Mais on a la façon de prévoir des communautés qui vont affirmer ce droit et les ressources qui vont vouloir affecter. Et comme le chef national l'a dit très clairement, c'est une question de besoin et c'est à travers de protocoles comme ceci qui ne sera pas le protocole unique. On peut entrevoir des protocoles qui s'effectueront avec d'autres communautés, avec d'autres groupements régionaux. Ce sera une discussion qui sera plus détaillée que nous le faisions auparavant, c'est-à-dire de se jeter des chiffres ou de faire ça du haut d'Ottawa sans consulter qui que ce soit. Plus jamais ce modèle. Et maintenant, un modèle plus collaboratif qui va procéder à cet engagement communautaire où les communautés affirment leurs droits et en conséquence les ressources nécessaires pour perfectionner ce droit.
Merci. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Dylan Robertson, Winnipeg Free Press. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Hi there. Thanks for taking the questions today. I have a question for both the Minister and the National Chief. I'm wondering, what is the farthest any groups have gotten into the devolution process under C-92, and what is the main impediment to them achieving this?
Well, Dylan, there have, as you may be aware, there have been a number of communities that have submitted interest in affirming their rights to our. It's not something we discuss publicly. This is really an engagement that is with Indigenous Services Canada and the community in question. So I think part of continuing to build the trust, which is often very tenuous, is to ensure that discussions, even those that are in good faith, and even if I'm saying good things in the public media, are not done without their consent. So I would hesitate to speak I would hesitate generally to speak for those communities, but I was specifically on this issue, which is it's a very emotional one. It's a very real one. The impediments are the ones that have been identified. Generally, resources, obviously COVID. With communities closing down and shutting down and focusing on protecting their community members, elders in particular, has inevitably slowed down discussions. I don't think it's changed anyone's resolve. I think one of the lessons from this, coming out of COVID, is it will strengthen the resolve in the areas that were priorities to Indigenous peoples, and foremost of which is control, custody, and the affirmation over an inherent right to their children. But that is very much, I believe, and hopefully a temporary measure. There will be discussions over a number of issues, not only the substance of the laws that are put forward, but also the resources and allocation. It really depends on capacity within the community, numbers of children, data. There are a number of issues that were identified in committee as the law was being discussed and adopted that remain, Dylan. And so I would point you to those in particular, but I won't go into any detail of what any particular community or nation has asked us out of respect for that nation. Thank you.
I can just add, Dylan, one of the the biggest challenges going forward. There should almost be like 13 bilats in addition to what's going on with C92 across Canada, because you have to engage the provinces. And some provincial premiers and governments are a little bit more advantageous or more open to deal with this and have better relationships with First Nations chiefs and leaders in their respective territories than others. Let's be open and frank about it. And so one of the biggest challenges is to working with premiers and the appropriate ministers and chiefs and their leadership to talk about transition, to talk about existing laws, to make sure that children don't fall through the cracks, because this is all about embracing change, because we both know the status quo is not acceptable. So that's one of the biggest challenges, is getting the premiers and the territorial governments to accept that there is a jurisdiction that needs to be respected. And let's set up those tables together, province by province, territory by territory, with First Nations leadership to work this out. And that's the most important thing going forward. And I think if all levels of government focus on the children and meeting the needs of the children, this can get done. So it's really embracing that change is afoot, and it should really be embraced, because it really is about bringing down those numbers in a system that doesn't work. 40,000 is way too high, and it's just not acceptable.
As follow-up, Dylan?
And National Chief, which provinces are the ones that are getting in the way here?
Well, I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, Dylan, but we've just talked about one province constitutionally challenging the constitutionality of C92, so that should speak for itself. There are some other premiers that are willing to work with First Nations chiefs and have done some positive things, but there's still a long way to go. So I would just encourage that the bilats be set up as soon as possible to respect First Nations jurisdiction and start getting to work on the implementation of this, because it's high time. Like I said earlier on, it's one thing to have a law, but it's really more important for the implementation of it to really bring about change that's so desperately needed to meet the needs of the children across Canada.
Thank you. Operator, next question. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Todd Lamirande, APTN National News. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Thank you. Good morning, Minister Miller and National Chief Bellegarde. I'm just wondering, how will the COVID crisis and the projected deficit because of it, and I heard the number $250 billion thrown around, affect these bilateral meetings when you're going to be talking Turkey, talking about funding, and to protect against future austerity measures. And I don't have to remind the National Chief that it was a Liberal government that put in a 2% annual funding cap well over a decade ago.
And I would say to anyone listening, Todd, what is the cost of doing nothing? We've seen what the cost of inaction is. We see it in court cases. We see it in the socioeconomic gaps that are the unacceptable disparity between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, and particularly most vulnerable, including children and the elderly. When you talk about a large number of a deficit, I think we need to look at ourselves as Canadians and say, where do we invest? What are our most precious assets? Who are we as a country? Who are we in terms of who we represent, or at least pretend to be? Are we living up to that standard? All those questions, in my mind, you always have to be prudent fiscally, and this isn't a question. And in this case, being wise fiscally is investing in the most important asset, which is children, and the resources that are the largest growing segment of the population. We've tried the other model, and it costs money, and it would. If you look at it from a numbers perspective, the courts are telling us what to do, and we've been spending time as a federal government catching up to court cases. And so we want to get ahead of this. Part of fixing is recognizing the errors of the past and also making the investments. So that's why the importance of money, and you highlighted it, Todd, but there is also a reflective part of this, which is one where we ask people to think about what the cost is of inaction. And we've seen it, and you can price it increasingly, and it is much larger than, frankly, the cost of investing into what is the most, one of the most precious, if not the most precious asset, if you can even term it in those words of this country, which is in children.
Just to add to Minister Miller's comments, Todd, is that, I've always talked about the gap in Canada, the socioeconomic gap that exists between First Nations people and the rest of Canadians. I used to use the number 6 versus 63rd. Depending on the latest statistics, it could be 7 versus 73. But Canada, according to the United Nations Human Development Index, is rated very high, 6 quality of life. But when you apply the same indices to First Nations people, we're 63rd. And so that gap needs to be closed. And so that's why you see historically that the $21.4 billion over 7 fiscal years to catch up in housing and education and water and infrastructure and healthcare, the social determinants of good health, because First Nations people weren't even at the same starting line. And so that has to continue. Then bring it back more into focus related to the 40,000 children in care. And the fastest growing segment of the population in Canada are young First Nations men and women. And so you need to invest in that human capital, that pool, to make sure that there's good education opportunities, good healthcare, proper healthcare. So these people, our young people, can really contribute to the overall growth of Canada. So once that gap closes and you invest in children because they're gifts from the Creator, that's what our elders always tell us. Children are gifts from the Creator. You got to focus on them. And they'll have huge returns on investment for the country overall because the gap will close. And we say, when you invest in those social determinants of health, it's not only good for First Nations people, it's good for the country as a whole. And that's really what it's all about. So we have to continue with those investments. And that's what I call them, investments. And even in spite of COVID-19, these are things of getting basic fundamental human rights and getting First Nations people to the starting line as the rest of Canadian society.
As a follow-up, Todd?
National Chief, you talked about perhaps having 13 bilateral meetings, meaning all the provinces and territories have to come aboard, and there was talk about Quebec instituting a constitutional challenge. But what about a province like Saskatchewan? There are a lot of First Nations or Indigenous children in care in that province. Mm-hmm. And ever since Bill C-92 was passed and implemented in January, they've expressed some reservations over it. Would it come down to maybe the federal government having to sue a province to get them to cede control?
I don't know. I'm not going to speak on behalf of the federal government, Todd, but I would just encourage again the premiers and Saskatchewan. I'm from Saskatchewan, and I know Premier Scott Moe is there, Chief Bobby Cameron is there, Vice Chief David Pratt's in charge of the portfolio. You've got tribal councils. There's some really exciting things with Tribal Chief Mark Arcan, the Saskatoon Tribal Council. So it varies province by province by province in terms of where people are at with the implementation of C-92. I would just encourage again the provincial premiers and the governments to embrace change and to set up those bilats and to start working with First Nations leaders. It's more productive when you sit down and start cooperating and collaborating, communicating together for the implementation of C-92, because ultimately you're going to get better results. And that's really what it's all about. And that's what I'm going to keep encouraging. And it's different every province by province and territory by territory in terms of what kind of relationship they have with their premiers and their respective provincial governments or territorial governments. And so, but I encourage that to happen, those bilats to happen, because that's part of the implementation. It's collaboration, communication, and talking and working together to bring about change. Because I'm going to keep harping on it. 40,000 children in foster care, not acceptable. So let's focus on prevention. Let's respect First Nations jurisdiction over children, because First Nations law is paramount, and let's move.
Thank you, merci. We will now take questions from the room. Again, one question, one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions dans la salle. Encore une fois, une question et une question suivie.
Ministers, National Chief and Elder Mitchell. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News. Indigenous youth in care and many advocates say that since your government pledged to overhaul the Indigenous child welfare system, they have seen little to no change. And now they're watching your federal government spend billions of dollars on COVID-19 relief. And what they're saying is that this just goes to show your government has always had the means to address the inequalities in the child welfare system, but it has chosen not to. So Minister Miller, can you be very clear this morning as to how much money the federal government is willing to commit to overhaul the First Nations portion of the child welfare system, what the timeline is, and if you can't give these numbers, why is that?
Well, thank you, Olivia, and I read your article. So I guess you're quoting Dr. Blackstock, and I don't think I won't criticize her words. She is someone who spends every waking hour fighting for Indigenous children, and I deeply respect that. The fact that there is that criticism out there is something we need to think about. The COVID money, I won't call it a false equivalency because it has been focused on ensuring that Canadians, Indigenous peoples living in Canada, stay safe and have the resources available to fight a pandemic, the viral profile of which we have still fully yet to understand, and that we are still very much worried about. And so ensuring that no one gets left behind has been a seamless thread of what this government has tried to do from the outset, and deploying money and financial resources, physical resources to that end has been its sole resolve. But there has been a number of other issues that have created a unique vulnerability in Indigenous communities, notably the socioeconomic gaps as embodied in overcrowding and susceptibility to the disease that we have been at pains to work with communities to deploy resources into. With respect to children in care, for example, as a specific example, we moved quite promptly to ensure that children that were aging out of care were financially supported and were able to continue because of that unique vulnerability that I highlighted earlier. I have made and will continue to make budgetary asks. The Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance will continue to support the implementation of C92. As I mentioned in a previous answer, I think COVID has made us realize the importance, perhaps even of accelerating a number of the challenges that we see in Indigenous communities. But it takes that collaboration and work with Indigenous communities, and in this case also provincial and territorial partners, to sit down at the table and start numbering things out. We have thrown numbers around, but they are far from precise and far from accurate of specific needs on the ground. So the reason an aggregate number doesn't reflect particular needs is because there are so many. They need to be broken out, and they need to be done with the rights holders, which are community members and nations, as we engage into the process of affirming that right, inherent right over child and family services.
If this is needs-based allocation and more than half of the kids in care are Indigenous, is this conversation really about pulling up to half of provincial child welfare budgets and putting it into new Indigenous child welfare services?
Well, we're going to have to sit down, and one of the conversations that we are going to have to sit down at tripartite tables with provinces is to talk about resources and how they're allocated, not only the quantum, but also to what end they are allocated, from going from an intervention model to a prevention model. And that will require a rethinking of a way of doing things that we've been doing up to now and that has failed. So that will inevitably require discussions with the provinces. There have been a lot of talk about conflict with the provinces, and we have some deep objections to some of the legal challenges. But I'd prefer to be in a discussion as to who is doing the best job by Indigenous children, and not who has the right to continue to be doing a miserable job, which is what we've been doing up to now. That means what the National Chief ended his statement on in a previous answer, which is collaboration. We talked a lot about Quebec, but I've had some great discussions with Ministre d'Amour about how their system needs to do better. And we will continue that, and the federal government will be there every step of the way. But we have the tendency too often to embody these in sort of court cases and flashpoints of conflict. But this will require some sitting down, some difficult conversations with Indigenous partners at the table, and not simply among federal and provincial officials. J'essaie de me souvenir ce que je vais pas traduire je traduire à l'emporte-pièce, puis si j'oublie des éléments, je m'en excuse. Je vais débuter de la façon que j'ai conclu, c'est-à-dire qu'on a un peu cette fâcheuse manie de se disputer le droit de faire cette job exécrable que nous avons fait jusqu'à date, au lieu de se disputer qui fait la meilleure job auprès et pour les peuples autochtones, notamment les enfants autochtones. Et c'est dans et puis ce cadre d'analyse en est un qui met l'emphase sur la collaboration, la discussion, le dialogue avec les partenaires autochtones, avec les provinces, sur les ressources, sur nos façons de faire, sur nos façons. Il y a un constat unanime d'échec sur notre façon de faire. Tout le monde réalise à quel point il faut faire une meilleure job. Et donc, parfois, on met l'emphase trop souvent sous l'optique d'un conflit constitutionnel, alors que mes discussions avec les officiels, avec les ministres du Québec sont des discussions qui sont productives, qui mettent l'emphase sur la collaboration, l'importance de réformer le système, d'affirmer ce droit qui incombe aux Premières Nations, c'est-à-dire le droit et le contrôle sur l'épanouissement de leurs propres enfants. Ça saute aux yeux. Ça pourrait pas être plus clair que ça. Le droit d'avoir le contrôle et la garde de ses propres enfants, chose que nous prenons pour acquis comme non-autochtones. Mais ça prend ce dialogue, ça prend cet engagement, ça prend des ressources financières et une façon franchement de repenser notre façon d'intervenir pour mettre l'angle plus et davantage sur la prévention et l'épanouissement des communautés, chose que nous n'avons pas faite jusqu'à date.
Good morning, Chiefs and Ministers. Molly Thomas, CTV National News. Minister Miller, let me come back to you and double down on my colleague's question. Is there a timeline on those budgetary asks and for these regional meetings to happen? Because this bill was given royal assent last June. It's a whole nother year that children are in a system that you say doesn't work.
So these discussions are important to framing the engagement that we have in terms of resource, in terms of engagement. I don't think you would hear from the national chief that he would be speaking in the name of different communities. There are protocols that we need to engage when a community is prepared to affirm its inherent right over its children, to come into a process so that no children get left behind. Now that will vary from community to community. It's not something that will happen overnight or at a set time point. This will take many years. It should be no surprise to anyone that there are different capacities without judging within communities. Some communities are ready, some are less ready. These will be discussions that have sometimes nothing to do in most people's mind with prevention and intervention, but sometimes over housing capacity and challenges in some of the communities that may have, frankly, more children in care. I want to clarify one point that I'm sure you weren't intending to misconstrue, but on January 1st, it was an important date because it set that national standard for the rights of the child. And even before that, courts were looking towards that standard. So courts have to apply that. But when you get to a court case, more often than not, the intervention has occurred. And so what we're doing is turning people's minds to the issue of this unacceptable issue throughout Canada, moving provinces, moving territories towards provincial models, and ensuring that an inherent right is respected. And so these are longer processes and longer discussions that will involve bilateral and trilateral meetings with a vast number of communities over a number of years.
Budgetary ask.
So in terms of budgetary ask, I've put and we've worked quite clearly to get numbers out for what we profile to be uptake, I guess, over the next fiscal year or so. assuming a 5-year model. Now, we might not be right, but these are discussions, and I think this is one of the utilities of the protocols today is fixing what those numbers may be on an aggregate level, knowing that we might not get it right, but knowing that because it is a needs-based model that we must always come back for more. There is a machinery of government aspect to this I think you're alluding to. And so I think in the next little while, we can expect numbers to roll out. Those are not numbers that I'm at liberty to disclose, but I would note that even before the coming into force of the law, we were allocating resources to communities that wanted to engage and giving them financial resources to engage and start that process.
Chief Bellegarde, my second question's for you. I want to ask about Quebec and them being against C-92. We're having a needed but uncomfortable conversation about race, about dignity and autonomy in our country right now. Do you see Quebec's rejection of this act as systemic racism against your people?
Well, I don't know if you'd call it systemic discrimination against First Nations people because they rejected C-92. Everybody's trying to protect their quote-quote jurisdiction. That's what it appears like. But I'll remind all governments, everyone in this room and across Canada, that there is the original governments of this land, First Nations governments, and that there is another law that needs to be respected. Creators law, natural law, First Nations law, in addition to common law and civil law. And that's the road. If we start talking about restorative justice or reconciliation in Canada, on the bigger piece, that's where we need to go. And I think there's an education awareness process right across Canada that's required to make sure that people don't forget that. And that's all that we're trying to work out here now, is that in C-92, First Nations law is paramount. It's clear. And that's the first time that other governments have recognized that First Nations law is paramount, above federal law, provincial law, when it's developed. But now it's implementation time. And so I would just encourage people to continue to collaborate, communicate, and work together, and to respect and recognize that there is another jurisdiction in Canada. And that's really what it's all about. If you want to start talking about reconciliation and jurisdiction and respect, to not forget, in 1867, the British North America Act, it wasn't just the federal government, provincial governments, and territorial governments. There's also First Nations governments. And that's what we need to keep in mind going forward. And that's my response.
Merci. Prochaine question.
Bonjour, Monsieur Miller, Monsieur Bellegarde, Christian Noël de Radio-Canada. Le chef des Premières Nations du Québec, Monsieur Picard, a dit que l'attitude du Québec devant tout ça est une attitude malhonnête. En français, est-ce que vous partagez cette évaluation, et sinon, comment est-ce que vous la caractérisez? And in English for Chief Bellegarde, Chief Picard said that Quebec's attitude towards all of this was dishonest. Do you share that assessment? And if not, what is your assessment? En français et anglais.
Écoutez, depuis le début, je peux vous témoigner de mes expériences personnelles avec la ministre d'Amour en ce qui a trait à cet enjeu en particulier, puis ça en était un de collaboration. Nous avons un désaccord net quant à la constitutionnalité de la loi. Je vous partagerai, je ne cacherai pas ça. Comme je l'ai dit en anglais, j'aimerais mieux avoir cette discussion sur qui fait la meilleure job au lieu de qui a le droit d'assumer un travail qui a été mal fait pendant des générations et de revendiquer ce droit. Si on le revendique, et qu'on l'assume, c'est parce qu'il y a des conséquences monétaires aussi. Mais la réalité, c'en est un de collaboration. Ça va prendre le contrôle des services de garde est fait en grande partie par les provinces. Ça va prendre la collaboration. Il n'y a personne qui va nier ce droit à un enfant, n'importe lequel, que ce soit un enfant autochtone ou non autochtone. Je pense qu'une des grandes réalisations de cette loi, c'est de mettre l'emphase et le focus des politiciens sur un enjeu dont on n'a pas l'habitude de parler et de le mettre à l'avant-plan. C'est une chose réussie. Là, il reste une mise en vigueur très difficile qui va prendre des années. Et la prise en charge d'un droit inhérent qui a été nié à travers des décennies aux peuples autochtones. Donc, le chef Picard, je le respecte profondément. C'est une personne qui est passionnée quant à cet enjeu parce que il parle des enfants de son peuple. Alors, je ne veux pas critiquer son affirmation, loin de là, et je respecte ce qu'il dit. Mais moi, je peux vous témoigner de la collaboration et de la collaboration que ça prendra pour finalement assurer que ce droit inhérent soit respecté.
It just demonstrates the frustration. You know, Chief Picard sits on our AFN executive, representing Quebec and the First Nations in Quebec and the nations there. And it shows, his comments shows the level of frustration that the Quebec government is not getting it, is not recognize the First Nations law and jurisdiction in that province. And so you see that sense of frustration. And that's why statements are made like that. And of course you have to support, because that's the lived experience. And you can't deny that. And so again, to encourage those bilats to be developed and implemented in that province, to sit down with them and to respect the jurisdiction of the Cree and of the Wendat and the Mohawk, the Ongwahoe, the Haudenosaunee peoples that are there, and the Innu, you know, like they're nations, the Abenaki, like there's many nations in La Belle Province de Quebec, and their jurisdiction needs to be respected. And when you have strong comments like that, it shows you the level of frustration. And that you can't deny that. It's real and it's a lived experience. So we need to turn that and try to get into an energy where people do get something positive together. That's how I see.
Merci. And in English to you and en français to Mr. Miller as well. Children and communities have been waiting a long time for this to be in place. There is constitutional challenges in court that might take years. What is your deadline? Quel est votre deadline, Monsieur Miller, pour que ce soit en place et officiellement en fonction?
I would say in English, the deadline is as soon as possible, like to encourage, again, not to waste energy and effort and time challenging the constitutionality of C-92, and start working with First Nations leadership to implement it in a respectful way, focusing on the children. It's focusing on the children in care, because this is really what it's all about. And any level of government cannot argue with that, putting the needs of the children first. And by looking at a constitutional challenge, it wastes time, energy, and effort. It's a waste, you know. It's just as soon as possible to sit down. So that would be
J'ai peut-être mal compris la question, mais la loi est en vigueur. Elle n'a pas été suspendue. Mais le protocole, on continue, on va de l'avant. Puis s'il y a des communautés au Québec qui veulent affirmer leurs droits, on les encourage de le faire, comme toute autre nation à travers le pays. Donc, on continue. L'argent, ça n'a rien à voir avec la constitution judiciaire. Il n'y a rien qui a été suspendu. La loi est en vigueur, on continue, on va de l'avant. Le protocole d'entente s'applique. Ce protocole d'attente s'applique quant à l'APN. Donc, ils vont continuer, que ce soit leur vol à Québec ou non. Et on fera ce qu'on fera selon le protocole en tant que tel. Donc, on continue et en ce qui a trait à la contestation judiciaire, nous défendrons nos droits constitutionnels comme nous l'avons fait par le passé.
Merci, c'est ce qui met à la conférence de presse. Thank you. This is what is ending this press conference. Thank you.